There are 3 train sim world routes based out of the New York City area, but for a variety of reasons, 2 of them, namely New York to Trenton and the original Long Island Railroad, are so horrendous that I uninstalled them ages ago. The only NYC route I have retained is the Harlem Line, even if only for its decent quality rolling stock and often busy timetable. The first time I tried reviewing this route was in April 2022. Then I revisited it in April 2023, but since I'm not happy with that second review anymore, I thought it needed to be updated again. The Harlem Line add-on was released in March 2022, back in the TSW2 era. I always buy TSW add-ons from Steam because I play the PC version of this game, and the Harlem Line version that's compatible with TSW4 costs $43.59 NZD on Steam. I often rake Dovetail games over the coals for their annoying tendency to make routes that are unreasonably short and linear, and the Harlem Line is no exception. DTG only built the in-game route coverage as far as North White Plains, which is a measly 24 miles north of Grand Central Terminal. I can kind of understand why they didn't make the entire line. It is 82 miles from Grand Central to Wasake, and I get that a lot of services do start and terminate at North White Plains, but it's still ridiculous that DTG didn't bother at least extending the route coverage up to southeast, where the electrification ends. While a 53-mile long route is nothing to write home about, in the grand scheme of things, it's still a damn sight better than 24 miles. For whatever reason, Dovetail also included a tiny section of the Hudson Line, but only as far as Yankees East 153rd Street station. If I'm not mistaken, the Yankees part of the name is a reference to the nearby baseball stadium. In any case, and although there are some timetable mode services representing Hudson Line traffic, I don't bother driving them because they're so short that they're pretty much pointless. This situation reminds me of the Port Washington services on the LIRR. Although they are represented in timetable mode alongside the unrealistically infrequent Ronkonkoma and Hempstead trains, you can only drive them on the short section between Penn Station and Woodside. Dovetail did officially announce the extended LIRR as part of their April 2024 roadmap, and while I'm still hoping that the extended version will be a damn sight better than the original, and I'm looking forward to driving the M9, I'm confused at Dovetail's decision to add the Long Beach branch, instead of something more important like Port Washington, Oyster Bay, or Ronkonkoma. Cutting the route coverage at Hicksville, of all places, never made any sense. As for motive power, the route only includes the M3A and M7A electric multiple units, which are similar to the M3 and M7 on the Long Island Railroad, albeit with some notable differences. For one thing, each system uses a different type of third rail electrification. Metro-North uses bottom contact, while the LIRR uses top contact. But both systems use 750-volt DC and in-cab signalling. The highest permitted speed on the Harlem Line is 75 miles per hour, but most of the section north of Woodlawn is capped at 60 or 65. The M3A and M7A in TSW are not just lazy reskins of the existing LIRR units. DTG did alter the models with the right detail differences, and they also improved the sounds. One thing I like about having 2 different EMUs to run on the route, aside from both classes actually running on this line in real life, is that they sound completely different from each other. If you can actually hear the M3A's motors, they sound like a low-pitched growl or whirring noise, while the M7A's motors make an unmistakable high-pitched whine, and change frequency several times between 0 and 10 miles per hour. At least I think the motors are changing frequency. I'm not an electrical expert by any means. While the M3A's motors do sound similar to the Class 455 recordings that Dovetail used on the London Underground 1972 stock, I don't think Dovetail reused them again for the M3A. The motor sound heard on the 1972 stock has a noticeably deeper tone, and as an aside, what's with those NPCs refusing to board the train? Annoyingly, the General Electric P32 ACDM electro-diesel locomotive is not included in this add-on, and neither are the Shoreliner passenger coaches or Kawasaki M8 electric multiple unit. In real life, the Harlem Line shares tracks with the New Haven Line as far as Woodlawn, which is around half of the route coverage in TSW, by the way. It's very unrealistic to only see M3A and M7A units running out of Grand Central. As for the P32 ACDM's purpose, this is a dual-mode variant of the GE Genesis family, and Metro-North uses 31 examples of this class to provide a direct service from Grand Central to non-electrified destinations such as Danbury, Connecticut, plus Poughkeepsie and Wasake, New York. Incidentally, the full GCT to Wasake service only runs twice a day in each direction. Normally they just run a shuttle between Wasake and Southeast instead, which is typically hauled by Brookville BL20GH locomotives. Setting up these units is not as simple as just opening the throttle without having to do anything else. As demonstrated here in the M7A's cab, you have to insert the master key first, then put the reverser in forward and the combined throttle and brake lever in max brake. After that, you needed to charge the brakes up to 90 psi before switching the headlights on. These units have door control panels behind the driver's seat, but if you don't want to use those, you can press either the Y or U keys to open the doors depending on which side of the track the platform is on. As for the alerter and in-cab signals, the switches for those systems can be found in the panel next to the door controls. By default, the systems are disabled, but it's more realistic to drive them with them enabled, of course. But I usually have them disabled myself, since the signal speed sometimes hinders one's ability to run on time, and I always thought the alerter was annoying. But to be fair, it does serve a very important purpose in real life, making sure the driver is still conscious. Besides the decent sounds on the M3A and M7A, another silver lining in this add-on, and just about the only other silver lining, come to think of it, is timetable mode, where you get 49 playable services for the M3A and 214 for the M7A. I wonder why the M3A has so few services compared to the M7A. The express services to and from Mount Kisco and Southeast are featured here, as are the local services that only go as far as Crestwood and North White Plains. There's even some empty stock, aka deadhead movements present in the timetable as well. Although the route coverage is so bloody short, the amount of time it takes to cover the whole section still varies wildly depending on your stopping pattern. Express services that come down from, or continue up to, Mount Kisco and Southeast can take anywhere from 37 to 40 minutes to cover these 24 miles, while the local trains that stop at most or all stations can take over an hour. Oftentimes you have to run empty to and from the North White Plains yard at the start or end of your run. And if you've got the Sandpatch grade route, you'll sometimes see a CSX freight train trundling along the line on the eastern bank of the Harlem River, but I almost never see it myself. As much as I like the sounds on the M7A, I don't like the stupidly overpowered physics. For example, just look at how quickly this thing accelerates from a standing start, even when the throttle is only at 50% power. And I will also demonstrate how insanely quickly this thing slows down. Driving the M3A is a distinctly different experience. Not just because the M7A's cab isn't in a tiny cubicle off in one corner of the coach, but because the M3A has a notched throttle instead of a smooth one. For comparison with the M7A's physics, here's the M3A accelerating at notch 2, her equivalent of the M7A's 50% power. In a way, these older units remind me of the English Electric DM/D class sets that used to run in Wellington, despite being built by Budd instead of English Electric. Wellington's older units also had the driver's cab off to one side and in a little corner at the front. The timetable can be fairly busy, but only around the morning and evening peak periods, as one might expect. One time, I drove an 8-car M7A set on train 529, the 1223 Grand Central to North White Plains service. Throughout the journey, the route felt deserted, and apart from a southbound train arriving at Grand Central, I didn't see any other trains out on the line until I got to Wakefield, a station that's just over halfway between Grand Central and North White Plains. Not helping the situation is the often lousy scenery on this route, and the lack of the Kawasaki M8 EMU, for that matter. For whatever reason, Dovetail did not bother modelling the low-level platforms at Grand Central Terminal. When I first revisited this route in April 2023, I didn't know that Grand Central's suburban platforms were on 2 levels, but now the presence of the junctions just outside the station, where the tracks clearly go down to a lower level, actually makes sense to me. Unfortunately, Dovetail didn't model the iconic station concourse either, so the only part of the station you can explore are the high-level platforms that serve tracks 11 to 42. The high-level Metro-North platforms also feature a return loop connecting tracks 38 to 42 with the tracks round the other side of the station, going past some stabling sidings in the process. I don't really see the point of this loop myself, since all the trains have cabs at both ends, unless it's like a leftover from the days when Amtrak trains used to run to Grand Central. A problem that I noticed when the add-on was brand new is still present 2 years after its release. Out of the 18 stations on the Grand Central to North White Plains section, 10 do not have passenger information screens, namely Grand Central, Fordham, Williamsbridge, Woodlawn, Bronxville, Tuckahoe, Crestwood, Scarsdale, Hartsdale, and North White Plains. Meanwhile, the stations that do have PIS displays use the same inaccurate design that can be found on the Long Island Railroad, Boston Sprinter, and New York to Trenton routes. As much as I don't like the Antelope Valley Line for its Spartan timetable and stupidly long journey times, not to mention the long distances between stations, at least that route has a unique PIS design for once. Strangely, you'll often see AI trains pulling up right behind the next one in front, and then the two trains move along with one still right behind the other. I've seen this happen to me when I've actually driven a train, and I remember being told that this is something to do with how the signalling is set up, or something of that nature. For the longest time, I thought it was yet another bug that Dovetail conveniently forgot to fix. A major issue can be seen in full view at Melrose, Tremont, and Woodlawn, 3 stations where the platforms are only long enough for no more than 4 coaches. Because this game still doesn't have selective door opening despite being 7 years old, all the doors will still open down the entire train, even on the coaches that are well off the platform. This problem can also be observed at Hollis on the Long Island Railroad. At some stations, Dovetail put the stop markers in the wrong place, for whatever reason. For example, I was on a northbound run with the M7A and tried to stop dead on the marker at White Plains, only to find that the last 2 coaches were left off the end of the platform, despite said platform being long enough for 8 coaches. Another time, when I was going down to Grand Central with the M3A, I stopped dead on the marker at Mount Vernon West and found that the last 4 coaches were off the end of the platform. This is despite the fact that the platform looks to be long enough for 10 coaches. In terms of badly placed stop markers, the worst offender I noticed was at Harlem 125th Street. I noticed this one later on after stopping at Mount Vernon West. This marker was placed so far back from where it should have been that the better part of 5 coaches were left off the end of the platform. Also, what the hell is up with these excessively bright lights below the station? It's like I'm staring straight into the sun. As you enter the Park Avenue tunnels on the westernmost track, the train visibly clips through the tunnel wall. I don't know how Dovetail could have made such a basic mistake, but here it is anyway. Meanwhile, there's a tree at Melrose that's placed way too close to the track, and the same issue can be found at a few more spots further up the line. For whatever reason, some stations, including Tremont, Woodlawn, and Scarsdale, do not have any fences at the ends of the platforms, and yet other stations like Wakefield, Fleetwood, and Tuckahoe do have fences at the platform ends. Why is there so much inconsistency with the fences, and the previously mentioned passenger information screens, for that matter? Oh, and there's also sloppy foliage detail right next to the track and under the Cross-County Parkway Bridge at Fleetwood, plus a very bad rendition of what I think is supposed to be the intersection of North McQuestion Parkway and Fleetwood Avenue. Frankly, I am so tired of seeing weak trackside scenery so often in TSW routes that I can't be bothered making specific notes of it anymore. Well, on the Harlem Line at least. I vaguely remember the preview stream for this route, where Matt Peddleston himself was trying to explain why they only went as far as North White Plains. If I recall correctly, it was something about making sure it could fit in with their release schedule or something about not overwhelming their staffers. I can't remember exactly. As I can tell from the Harlem Line's weak scenery, it's clear that Dovetail's team were either too lazy or on too big of a time crunch to put in the effort required to add the missing North White Plains to Southeast section, let alone make presentable scenery south of North White Plains. At the end of the day, and despite all its flaws, such as the frustratingly short route coverage, bad stop marker placement, lousy scenery, and overpowered physics on the M7A, I still enjoy the Harlem Line's busy timetable and the experience of driving high-density commuter services with trains from either the 1980s or early 2000s. As always, there is room for improvement, and what this route desperately needs is an extension to southeast, not to mention all the other problems that need fixing. Speaking of extensions, I'm intrigued at the extended Long Island Railroad that's coming out at the end of April, but I won't say anything more about it until the add-on is released. Even with the updated LIRR coming soon, I would still like to see the Staten Island Railway in TSW as well. Of course, it would have to be the full 14-mile long route from St. George to Tottenville. As for the Harlem Line, I'll leave it up to you to decide whether or not you should buy the add-on if you haven't got it yet. Regardless of whether you do or don't own this thing, feel free to leave your thoughts on it in the comments section.